Hi everyone, welcome back to a new episode of Learning from the Wild. In this episode, we're going to talk with Dr. Pamela Plotkin. She is the director of the Texas Sea Grant organization.
This organization focuses on improving the quality of the ocean. So we're excited to talk to Dr. Pam with her many years of experience and get to know a little bit more about the conditions of the ocean, how they've improved, and what we can do better. So without further ado, let's just jump right into the episode. So thank you so much, Pam, for coming on this interview with us. We are so excited to talk to you. Basically, we are just here to hear your experiences from working as the director of the Texas Sea Grant and how you came about in this position, and just learn more about you and your field where you work at. And we just want to start off with asking you, why did you choose to study wildlife sciences? What motivated you?
When I was an undergraduate student, I was attending Penn State University in State College, Pennsylvania, and I started out wanting to become a veterinarian because to me that was the only pathway I knew of to work with animals. And I loved animals from the time I can remember, my earliest memory. And I loved watching wildlife documentaries on TV. I loved being outdoors as a child, and I had grown up in New York City, in Manhattan, and so living in a concrete jungle was torture for a child who wanted to be outdoors and wanted to see animals and be with animals. And those few opportunities that I did have to get outdoors on family vacations were just priceless to me. And so it was, it wasn't a surprise to anybody that I wanted to help animals and work with animals when I went off to college. And so, the only pathway, like a lot of students my age, going from high school to college, think about becoming a veterinarian because they don't know about all the different opportunities that are out there. And so after my freshman year at Penn State, they opened up a brand new major called wildlife science. And I didn't even have to read about it. As soon as I saw wildlife science, I knew that was exactly the major for me. And so I switched majors and became a wildlife science undergraduate major and started taking classes that to me were just truly exciting and that I was passionate about, and gave me the tools that I needed to be successful later on in my graduate career and then in my professional career.
And what sort of geared you into the marine sciences? Because you do focus more on marine sciences, right?
I do, yeah. So when I was an undergraduate at Penn State, I was really eager to have a field experience or a research experience. And I was looking for professors who were doing research, and I wanted to volunteer my time to be a field assistant or research assistant with them. And no one was very excited about taking me into their lab or out in the field. And so I kept finding roadblocks in the way. And so I started looking for opportunities away from Penn State. And I was fortunate to find an organization called the Student Conservation Association. And they're still around, which is fabulous. And every year they place students and volunteers in national parks across the country. And so I found a little flyer on a bulletin board at Penn State. They had those little cards back then that you would fill out, and they would send you a brochure and some information. And when I got the brochure and the information, it was basically an application form and descriptions of all the different projects that they needed volunteers to work in the national parks. And so I read through all the descriptions. There were plenty to choose from, and my number one choice was to go work with wolves up at Isle Royale National Park. My second choice was to work with wild horses out in Northern California. And my third choice was to go work with the critically endangered Kemp's Ridley sea turtle in Texas at Padre Island National Seashore. And so I didn't get my first choice, and I didn't get my second choice, but I got a call from Padre Island National Seashore, and they said, we want you to join us this summer. And I was on a bus a couple of weeks later from New York City to Corpus Christi, Texas, and got to Padre Island. And, you know, you have all these visions of what Texas is going to be like. There were going to be cowboys, and their horses were going to be tied up, and they were going to be riding their horses up and down the street. It was nothing like that. It was mostly, you know, surfers who were down there at that time, and just open space and wonderful natural areas, and just pristine wilderness in some places. And so I fell in love with Texas. I fell in love with the beaches, and I got to work with a critically endangered sea turtle that summer. And I had always loved the ocean and had always loved being on the beach and being on the water. And so that was really a turning point for me. And I remember going back to Penn State after that summer experience, and I was sitting in one of my wildlife science classes. I think it was wildlife management. And we were talking about different animals and how you manage these different animals. And the classes were always focused on white-tailed deer or bear or grouse, you know, things that people hunt. I remember raising my hand and saying, well, what about sea turtles? How do sea turtles fit into this framework that we're discussing? And my professor started laughing, and he said, sea turtles aren't wildlife. And I knew at that point that, you know, I was in a major that was going to give me some really good tools, but it wasn't a marine science focused curriculum, and that I would need more. And so when I was a senior, I decided to do all my senior classes, which were all electives, at Texas A&M University, because I could take those marine science classes at Texas A&M University, transfer them back to Penn State, and still graduate from Penn State with that nice, solid marine science and marine biology background. So that was kind of how I filled in the gaps as an undergraduate. And then, you know, I was in Texas, and I was looking for a job, and I was about to apply to graduate school here. And I saw this advertisement for a student worker to help take care of the fish in the aquaria that were owned by Texas Sea Grant. So when I was about, I guess I was 22 years old at the time, I applied for a job to work with Texas Sea Grant, and I was hired to feed the fish and clean the fish and help in their marine education program. So it's kind of, you know, one of those great stories where things just happen, and there are lots of forks in the road and lots of opportunities along the way, and you just fall into something that that really is meaningful at that moment, but potentially meaningful later on down the road as well. And I got into graduate school here at Texas A&M. My major professor is a marine biologist. She's still here. And just really one of the best invertebrate biologists in the world. And so I was fortunate that she was willing to take me on, and that Texas A&M gave me an opportunity to pursue a degree in zoology with an emphasis on marine biology.
Yeah.
So.
And so that's how your journey began. And what does a typical month look like for you right now at the stage where you're at currently in your career?
Well, typically now I'm sitting at a computer and and I'm pushing paper is probably the best way to describe it. So, I got into this business because I loved being outdoors, and I loved working with animals, and I loved being hands-on. But there comes a point, when you get to be in your 40s or 50s where, your ability to do those things sometimes is reduced because of your physical ability, your mental ability, or your job. And so as I became more seasoned and progressed in my career, there were different needs for my time to be a decision maker rather than the person who is in the field doing the really fun work. But I try to get out in the field and do the really fun work as often as I can. Yeah. And it's just not often enough for me. So.
And in your career, at the early stages when you had a lot of hands-on work, was there any experience you shared with an animal that kind of impacted you in a positive way or in a negative way? An experience that kind of stands out for you in your memories, basically.
I have so many of them. It's really hard to pick just one, so I can share a couple of them with you. So as a graduate student at Texas A&M University, when I was working on my doctoral program, I was studying olive ridley sea turtles in Costa Rica in a very remote location in a national park, the Guanacaste National Park, which is in the northwestern part of the country. And the field site where we were working is about a 5-hour hike from the headquarters of the park. And so not many people are willing to do a 5-hour hike over a mountain. And so we were really isolated. We didn't have electricity. We were living in what I'll call primitive conditions. And I was living there for 6 months at a time, which was really spectacular for me, because I had always dreamed of living with monkeys. And so there I was living in the jungle with monkeys and crocodiles and snakes and army ants and everything, just immersed in that beautiful little dry tropical forest ecosystem with a little 1 kilometer beach that the olive ridleys loved. And they would come and do their thing once a month. They would gather in front of the beach, and then as if somebody blew a horn or flipped a switch, all the females would crawl up the beach and start laying their eggs in synchrony. And so the beach, that 1 kilometer beach, would sometimes be filled with sea turtles, and you'd have to kind of juggle around the sea turtles to walk and collect your data because there were so many turtles on the beach. And it was a fabulous place to live for 6 months and to work. And so 1 year, and this was just, a once in a lifetime experience. There was no wind. The sea was calm. We were expecting the turtles to come and nest any day, and they showed up offshore, and there were thousands of them just swimming back and forth in front of the beach. And on a typical day, the waves would be about 6 to 10 feet high and dangerous to swim in. But that day it was just calm, and it was a gift. And I grabbed my snorkel, my fins, and my mask, and I went out and I swam with those female turtles. And they were all over me. There were 10 above me, 10 below me, 10 on either side of me. Mm-hmm. And they were just swimming by, just looking at me, and just so interested in who I was and what I was. And they would just swim by, and it felt like I was in a dream. And
that sounds like a dream.
Yeah, it was a dream. And unfortunately, I didn't have an underwater camera, and I didn't have an underwater video, so I couldn't record it at the time. But even just thinking about it now just gives me chills, because it was really like nothing I've ever experienced with any kind of wildlife, where they seemed to accept who I was, and they were just doing their thing and waiting until that horn blew or that light switch went off so they could go and lay their eggs. And I think once they realized I wasn't a threat to them, they were just like, okay, she's cool. Wow. So I spent hours just swimming with the turtles, and it was just a thrill of a lifetime.
Do you know why there were so many in such a small place? Is there a reason for that?
Well, there is a reason for that. We still don't fully understand the reason for that. And there are places around the world that this species prefers to nest in these synchronous aggregations. And so Costa Rica has 2 of those sites. There are a couple of beaches like that in Nicaragua. And then there are some beaches in India, over in the Indian Ocean. And then over in French Guiana, Suriname, there is also a nesting aggregation. And so they all receive the same cues to come to the beaches at about the same time. And they all receive the same cues to emerge onto the beach to lay their eggs at the same time. But when they're done, they all go in different directions. And that was part of my research that I was doing. I put transmitters on the turtles because there was this long-standing hypothesis that these turtles migrated in schools like fish or in pods like whales, and that they seemed to march up the beach in these little clusters. And so there was a belief that they migrated away from the beach as groups. And so what I did was I waited till we saw a group of turtles coming up on the beach, and there might have been 5, 6, or 7 turtles in that group or cluster. And we'd catch them, we'd put satellite transmitters on them, and then we'd track their migrations when they were done for the nesting season. And if you put 6 transmitters on 6 turtles, they'd go in 6 different directions. And they'd migrate as far north as Mexico, as far south as Peru. And so they whatever those cues are, they get them at the same time, and they behave similarly. And so a lot of people believe that the behavior is one that increases the chance of survival of their eggs and hatchlings, which is a reasonable explanation. But if that is the reason why this behavior evolved in this sea turtle, why didn't it evolve in the other species of sea turtles? And that's what is really a huge mystery. But to complicate it even more, this species also nests individually or solitarily at beaches just next door to where they nest in synchronous aggregations. So not all the females are nesting in synchronous aggregations. There are just as many of them nesting individually along that entire coastline where you find them. So there's really an interesting question here as to why some of them do and some of them don't. And I think that what I've learned to appreciate is that there's a lot of variation in behavior in sea turtles, just like there is in all animals, and humans included, and that they have incredible flexibility and adaptability to be able to compensate for different changing conditions in their environment. So some years it's really dry, some years it's really wet, some years it's warmer than others. And I think that the females are able to put their nests and their offspring in places that are going to be advantageous to their offspring, given different scenarios that are changing all the time in the ocean as well as on land.
Wow. I mean, I feel like everything you hear, or what most people hear about sea turtles, is a lot of mystery behind them, from different types of sea turtles. Within, like you said, within the species themselves, they do very different things. Would you say that that mystery about them is something that has kept you interested in them for so long?
Absolutely. So my very first job that I told you about in Texas at Padre Island National Seashore, when I was a sophomore at the university, my very first day of work, I went out to the beach with my boss, and a sea turtle had washed up dead on the shoreline. And it was this beautiful hawksbill sea turtle, the kind of sea turtle that people used to kill to make jewelry out of, and hair combs and brushes and all sorts of things. And it was just sitting there. It was, maybe about 24 inches long. And I remember asking my boss, why did the turtle die? And he said, I don't know. And I said, well, where did it come from? And he said, I don't know. And I said, well, do you know where it was going? And he said, I don't know. And I said, do you know how old it is or was? And he said, I don't know. And I remember at first thinking, my boss really doesn't know a lot about sea turtles. But when I started looking into it a little further, what I realized was that nobody really knew that much about sea turtles. And there's still so many questions that we can't answer. And so for me, sea turtles have always been a mystery. And for so many people, they still are a mystery. And there's still so much to learn, not just about sea turtles, but our oceans in general. And there's been so much emphasis on land, a lot less emphasis in our oceans. And we're still trying to understand how our ocean functions in many places around the planet. And to me, that's just mind-blowing that it's 2022 and we still don't fully understand our oceans and the value they bring, the diversity they have, and the threats that they face now and in the future.
What do you think is missing from, like you just said, that our oceans are so valuable and there's so much that maybe we as humans can do to kind of lower our pollution processes? What do you think is missing in order to get people to listen and to actively do something to course correct so we take better care of our oceans? Do you think, what do you think is the key to kind of get people to wake up and do something?
That's a great question, and I think that there are a lot of people who have thought about that, who are working to try to engage broader audiences. And so, if you look at the United States, for example, or really any country, the coastline is an important part in terms of commerce, in terms of nutrition, and in terms of fuel. So it really is a critical area for many countries, but not that many people live on the coast compared to those that live interior. And so there are a lot of people who never have seen the ocean. There are a lot of people who may have seen it once or twice. And there are a lot of people who are very focused on what happens in their backyard and in their community, and not so much beyond their fence line. And it's hard to get people to support something if they don't love it, if they don't see the value of it, and if it's not impacting their lifestyle. So, you take somebody in an interior state in the United States. It could be Colorado, it could be Kansas. I don't want to pick on those people. But, if they're going to the grocery store and they're getting their food and they're not buying and depending on seafood, then if our oceans stop producing fish, it won't really matter to them because they weren't eating fish anyway, and they can eat other things. And that's just the way people think. And I guess the good news is there are a lot of people who do care about our oceans, and there are a lot of people in leadership positions who care about our oceans, and they're trying to push forward a greater awareness and understanding about the need to protect our oceans, because they do all sorts of things, like regulate and moderate our climate, which is important to interior populations. And so the more we can help people who are not coastal understand the importance of our oceans, I think the more progress we will make going forward. But it's still a heavy lift. And, I mean, you just take a look at the last couple of years and some of the climate disasters we've experienced around the world. And the science behind climate change is really solid and has been very solid for many years. And yet there are a lot of people who either don't believe or don't want to make changes that will ensure that my children and my children's children will have a planet that is sustainable into the future. And so it's really hard to affect change until something becomes a crisis. Yeah. And even when it becomes a crisis, sometimes it's hard to affect change. And I think we've seen that recently with COVID. We've certainly been living under pandemic crises, multiple crises related to COVID. And I think people have a little bit of crisis fatigue at this point in time, and so that also plays into it. But going back to your original question, I think education is critical, and I think that scientists need to do a better job of communicating their science to a general population and helping the public understand what's happening and what we need to do to make some course corrections to ensure that our planet is sustainable for future generations.
It's interesting to think about what you just mentioned it in the beginning, that it's important for people to care about something. They need to see the value in it first, right? And so how can people, that's a good question, like how can people see the value in the ocean? And then I mean people who don't necessarily live next to the ocean, like what value does the ocean have to people who might be listening right now and have maybe seen the ocean 2 times in their life and they don't really care, maybe, I don't know, but yeah, what value can they have from the ocean?
Well, the ocean plays a significant role in our global climate. Yeah. And so, one of the biggest problems that scientists have been studying is the increasing carbon in our ocean and the impact that's having on the animals that live there, but also on our climate. And so those are things that scientists are going to continue to study and hopefully communicate to the public so that they're aware that at some point we may be tipping the scales, and there will be, and we've already seen things like what we call heat waves in the ocean, and large-scale areas or big areas where animals succumb to the heat in the ocean. We've also seen persistent and large harmful algal blooms occurring all across the globe, and those harmful algal blooms have multiple causes. It's not just carbon, it's other nutrients that go into the watershed through farming and agricultural runoff and sewer systems and things like that. And then there are these incredible algal blooms in certain areas, and those algal blooms basically consume all the oxygen, and the animals in those areas often die in large numbers. And we have some really significant areas, one in the Gulf of Mexico off the coast of Louisiana and Texas that grows and shrinks in size every year, and is never really shrinking to a small size. It's just a little less big than it was the previous year. So we've got a number of what I'll call symptoms that are real apparent and have an impact on the animals that live there and on human populations as well. And so while it may seem like it's only happening in the water or it's only happening in the coastal populations, all of those things impact interior populations too. So climate and weather are linked, and we're going to see more intense weather events in the years to come because of our ocean and our changing climate that is having a direct impact on the ocean as well as the atmosphere.
Yeah, you hear it a lot that, and that's what I've known at least, is that the ocean is also sort of it regulates our climate. It regulates the temperature that people in the middle of the United States or in the middle of Europe, it regulates that climate that we have and the temperature. And that, for example, I read once in an article that the reason why we can live here in the north of Europe, basically, is that because, the Gulf Stream, which takes warm water basically from the warmer part of the ocean and probably in the Caribbean and Mexico, and then all the way up to the east of the United States, and then crosses the Atlantic to Europe. And because of that warm water, that we can actually live here, that we have a normal climate here. And it's quite interesting. It's like a sort of our heating system for the world, sort of.
Absolutely, heating and cooling.
Yeah.
And so it's underappreciated for that service that it provides us. And as our climate changes, there are going to be different places on land that are going to be livable and other that are not so livable. And so, the El Nino phenomenon is a great example of a climate phenomenon that impacts people on land. And so every few years there is an El Nino in the Pacific Ocean. And what happens typically is that the cold water, which comes up to the surface in a process known as upwelling, that's the normal process. But during an El Nino, the water warms and that upwelling is not happening. And so the water along the west coast of the United States becomes significantly warmer. Mm-hmm. And that impacts the climate across the United States and across Europe and elsewhere. And so people have studied this phenomenon for years. And you can see changes in certain areas of our planet that are associated with El Nino, to the point where, some years it's good to grow wheat in the Midwestern United States because there's an El Nino. And then other years it's not good because there's a La Nina. And so that's the alternate pattern that is driven by oceanographic conditions, the La Nina. So right now here in Texas, we are in a La Nina or La Nina year, as some people call it. And we're experiencing very warm temperatures, very dry temperatures. We haven't seen it this warm and this dry since 2011. During a previous La Nina, that was just as intense as this one seems to be. Mm-hmm. And so these cycles are really predictable. And so, we've learned to sort of live with these predictable cycles of El Nino, La Nina, but there are lots of other cycles that are becoming news cycles, less predictable, and scientists are studying them and trying to better understand the impact they're going to have on our climate, on our ability to grow food and crops, on our ability to live in certain places, and our ability to, provide all the fuel that we need to fuel our communities. So, when you think about the three most important things to humans, it's where can we live, how can we eat, and how can we fuel our homes and our cars and our lifestyle. Those really are the three necessities, and those are all going to be compromised in the future by changing climate.
I'm just curious because I'm sure in your years of experience, you've had this moment while you're doing field work where there's an environmental phenomenon going on or happening, or you've seen the consequences of the change in the environment. If you could share that experience with us.
Yeah, so I'll talk about the one that I think has been most significant in my lifetime, and one that has entered my life at different points in my career. And so when I was working on my master's degree, I was here in Texas, and I was studying loggerhead sea turtles in the Gulf of Mexico. And at that time, they were washing up dead by the hundreds because they were being captured incidentally by fishing, mainly shrimp trawl fishing. And so I was interested in using those animals to study their diet. And so as a turtle would wash ashore, I would do a necropsy on it, and I would save its intestinal contents and then sort through them later on in the laboratory to try to better understand what they were feeding and more importantly, where they were feeding. Because I thought that if we could identify areas where they were feeding, we could close those areas to fishing and save the turtles. So that was kind of the original goal of my project. And as I started collecting intestinal samples and going through them, I started finding a lot of garbage in their intestinal tracts. And I was finding cardboard, I was finding glass, I was finding aluminum, I was finding plastic, I was finding rope. And so at the end of my study, what I found was that well over 50% of the turtles that I sampled, and I sampled over 100 of them, over 50% of them had some kind of garbage in their intestinal tracts. And so I tried to publish that study, just the part about the garbage, and my paper was rejected from scientific journals because they said that was not science. Now, this was back in the 1980s, and this was before we had a proliferation of single-use plastics. Mm-hmm. And so at that time, people were actually dumping garbage offshore back in the 70s and 80s. And then the government passed the Marine Pollution Act and banned garbage dumping offshore. And so a lot of the garbage I was finding in the turtles at that time was from garbage that was dumped offshore by people who were out on ships. It could have been the cruise industry, could have been just recreational fishermen, could have been commercial fishermen, could have been people working on oil rigs. But that's where garbage was coming from because there were no regulations. Mm-hmm. And then my data were actually used to help support the Marine Pollution Act and to further expand that policy to finally ban offshore dumping. And so I was really excited because I was so naive back then. I thought, well, that's it. Our marine pollution problem is solved.
It's over.
And it's done, right? But then then we had a proliferation of single-use plastics. And, when I was your age, people didn't buy bottled water. We had, fountains. That's where you got water, and you maybe had a sports bottle that you'd fill up with water, and that was how you got water. Otherwise, you were thirsty.
Yeah.
And, there were aluminum cans with soda and other kinds of drink. We didn't have single-use plastics everywhere for everything.
Yeah.
And so I'll fast forward years later when I'm here at Texas Sea Grant, and I'm also a faculty member in the Department of Oceanography here, and I took on a graduate student to study sea turtles in Costa Rica, and part of her project involved looking at some sea turtles that were captured by fisheries in the Eastern Pacific Ocean near that area that is commonly known as the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And so these turtles were collected in the 90s and 2000s. They, as I already mentioned, were captured in fisheries, so we know how they died. And they were a great opportunity just to see what sea turtles in the Pacific Ocean were feeding on. And that was the intent of our study, was to help us understand their feeding behavior and feeding ecology. And as soon as we started opening up those intestinal tracts from those turtles, we started finding tons of plastic from single-use plastic. Bottle caps. There was one turtle that had about 32 bottle caps inside its stomach.
Wow.
Plastic bags, pieces of plastic wrappers. One turtle had an entire toothbrush in its stomach, and it had bitten it in two places. So the toothbrush was in three pieces in that turtle's stomach. And so after that study was finished, we found over 70% of those turtles had ingested some sort of plastic, and in very large quantities that were alarming. Now, this was in around 2012. And so by then, the scientific journals were interested in publishing our data and learning that sea turtles in the Eastern Pacific Ocean were eating a lot of plastic. Yeah. And so that was really good that we were able to get that study published and it got some attention. But a couple of years later, another graduate student of mine who's pretty famous, her name is Christina Figner, and she was also doing research out in the Eastern Pacific Ocean. She was on a boat one day. She was catching turtles with the intent of putting satellite transmitters on their shells to track their migrations from Costa Rica. And one day she and her team pulled a turtle onto the boat, and they noticed that turtle had something in its nostril. And so at first they thought, oh, it's a barnacle or it's a worm. And she had the great idea to start videoing the extraction of whatever that was living in that turtle's nostril. And so they took a little tool and started tugging on the thing in the turtle's nostril, and it turned out to be a plastic straw. And as they tugged and pulled out that plastic straw, you could see the turtle was in pain. The turtle's nostril started bleeding. And the good news was that the turtle was able to actually breathe normally after they removed that straw. Yeah. And they cleaned it up, and they released it to the wild. And they actually have seen that turtle a couple of times since they extracted that straw. And it was a male turtle, and he's doing just fine. But her video was so raw and so timely. And I remember she contacted me and she said, I've got this video. I'm going to send it to you. I really would like to post it on YouTube. I think it's really important for people to understand how plastic impacts wildlife. And this is the video that will help them understand that. And I remember I couldn't even watch the video. As soon as I saw them tugging on the straw, I was done. And I said, you have got to put that video on YouTube.
Yeah.
And it took her about 8 hours to upload that video
from
Costa Rica, because she didn't have good bandwidth, and it was a pretty big video. And within minutes of posting it, it just started getting views, and within days, it had hundreds of thousands of views. And it coincided with a time when there were a lot of organizations that were trying to educate the public about the perils of single-use plastic and how we needed to start making changes in our personal lives to reduce single-use plastics. And straws were a great place to start. We could all just stop using straws. They're not essential to most people, and that's a great place to start. And so that video really was a catalyst for a movement that had already begun. And it really took off after Christine's video. And so I remember at that point thinking, I've studied sea turtles eating plastic for decades now. I've published papers in journals for decades now. I haven't done anything to educate the public about sea turtles and the problems with plastics in our ocean. So Chris inspired me to do more, because she started doing more. It wasn't like she just posted a video and then that was it. She started talking to school groups. She started promoting these organizations that were helping to increase public awareness about marine plastics. And so I had saved all the plastic that I had taken out of sea turtle intestinal tracts, and I made these little traveling exhibits, and I started going to schools and to other places that would have me, and I started speaking about the sea turtles that I studied and the plastic that they ate and the impact that plastic is having on sea turtles and other animals in our oceans. And I haven't done much in the last couple of years since COVID, other than a few webinars, and I hope to get going again. But to me, she helped me understand that as a scientist, I can and I should do more, and that was really a watershed moment for me. And Christine has devoted her life to helping people become more aware about marine plastics, and I'm really proud of everything she's done to build that awareness.
It's obviously one thing to do all the research and to do all the research and investigate everything, and then it's a second thing to sort of share the message with as much people as possible, basically, and so that people can learn from it. And that's the second part. And but I think nowadays, where you were just telling us about, posting that video on YouTube, nowadays it's so easy to reach a lot of people with video content or something else or like this. So it gets easier, but it must be for you throughout your career. It must be a big change that now this is becoming more and more important to let people know, sort of like, hey, this is going on, like the big audience. And it's a challenge for all of us, because there's so many different social media opportunities now, and there's so many people who are out there trying to get attention. And so how do you get attention in that very big crowd? And some of it is luck. Some of it is, continued sustained effort to build audience, and then, to stay abreast of the changes in social media, right? And it's evolving so quickly that you really have to spend a lot of effort understanding
new ways to reach people and what people like, and it shifts and changes. And we saw that during COVID, right? I had never been on TikTok before COVID, and COVID gave me an opportunity to check out TikTok, and then I was hooked for days. I couldn't get off TikTok. And it's like, it's like potato chips. You can't eat just one, and you can't just, watch 1 minute of TikTok. You're in it for a while. So, it's wonderful to have these technologies and to be able to use them to reach greater audiences. And but it's a challenge to keep that audience and to find new audiences and new people who will spread your message and share your enthusiasm and passion.
I think, and I want to hear your opinion on this, but you started off at such a young age being so immersed in nature and the environment, and maybe that sparked something in you, in your mindset or your aspirations to kind of look at the way you live your life, maybe personally, or like you said, how you use single-use plastics, or how you can diminish that. Do you think that a key factor that's missing is that nowadays a lot of people are disconnected from nature, and then this doesn't allow people to connect and realize the importance of nature and how you can develop yourself with the help of it, and also appreciate life a little bit better?
Yeah, I think we've been disconnected from nature for a very long time, and I think that disconnect grows larger and broader and deeper every year. But I think that there are many people who have always valued nature, will always value nature, and will pass that down to their children and their children's children. And I think that the pandemic opened a lot of people's eyes to how they were living and forced them to go outdoors and remember how beautiful it is outdoors and how nature can fulfill our lives in a way that our lives have not been fulfilled without it. And so I'm actually thankful that the pandemic occurred for that one very reason, because I think that people stopped to really examine how they were living. And a lot of people made changes to where they work, where they live, how they live, and how they recreate. And we've seen increases in our national parks here in the United States. People are flooding national parks. Mm-hmm. People are, we're buying recreational vehicles at a pace that we hadn't seen in years. People want that experience. And I hope that continues to grow, because I think that that's healthy for us, and I think it's healthy for our planet, because the more people get out and have that natural experience, the more they will want to protect those environments. And so, every now and again you'll see the news share a story about Yellowstone National Park or Yosemite National Park, and how it's overrun with tourists this summer, and you need a reservation, and how uncomfortable it is. But to me, that's wonderful that people are fighting to get out to our national parks and want more. And that means we'll have more support for these areas and more appreciation for these areas. So I hope that continues. And I think that that the last few years were really a good sign of how people view and value our wild places.
Yeah, I think what we already discussed, the more people value nature in a better way, the better it is for nature as well. Like, the closer we get again to nature and not be like not a part of nature, the better it is. So what would be for you personally? You've spent a lot of time in nature, and from the jungles in Costa Rica to on the ocean, swimming with turtles. What have been maybe your top three lessons that you have sort of learned in terms of your own mental health or your way of thinking or seeing the world? What are some of your, top tips for people who haven't experienced everything that you've experienced?
Yeah, great question. So, drawing from my first big experience of living in the dry tropical forest of Costa Rica, being there for 6 months and seeing very few people during that time, and not having access to things like televisions and news and things like that, what I learned was that, I could live with a lot less in my life, a lot less in terms of possessions, a lot less in terms of what society kind of tells us we need to have in our lives.
Yeah.
And I emerged from that experience, and I remember coming back to Texas, and all my friends thought I was just a little weird after that experience, because I was very quiet and I was very reflective, and I had spent 6 months being very quiet and very reflective when I was in the jungle, and I had a calmness, really an inner peace that I had gained after those 6 months, and people just seemed to want to disturb that inner peace.
Yeah.
and I kept it for a real long time.
Yeah.
And every now and again, I have to remind myself of the inner peace that I feel when I go out into nature, and that really is something I learned when I was in the jungle. More recently, as I sit here at my computer and I spend most of my days in meetings, either on Zoom or in person, answering emails, signing documents, doing things that are completely administrative. When I do have that opportunity to go out in the field, I find that I love to just turn off everything.
Yeah.
And I just want to be in that moment. And whether it's in a boat, on the bay, or on the ocean, or just sitting on a beach, I just want to be in that moment. And I get sad when I go to these places and I see people on their phones, and they're on the beach and they're taking pictures and they're spending their entire time on their phone, and they're not really getting that experience of disconnecting and appreciating the environment that they're in. So for me, it's a way still to unplug and to find that inner peace that I love and need. And it's refreshing, because when I do come back to my office and I am sitting in front of the computer, things don't seem to be so important anymore.
Yeah. It resets your...
It does. So, so from the early part of my career to the late part of my career, my experience in nature has always done the same thing for me. Whether it's a big dose or a little dose, it's still, I think, so important. And every day, I start my day by sitting in my yard. We've got big mature trees in my yard. We've got a little over an acre. There's a lot of wildlife that lives in my yard. And so I know the birds that are nesting in my yard. And this morning, they've got 4 babies. This is their second nest. And one of the parents got caught in my screened-in porch this morning. And I quickly was able to get her out of my porch while her mate was flying back and forth, just so stressed out because she was caught in my porch. And they nest on the other side of my house, and their babies were waiting for food. So So I'm always tuned into what's going on right in my backyard, and I get so much pleasure from knowing what's there, what they're doing, and how they're living. And last night a coyote ran by me as I was sitting on my steps. Last week there was an armadillo in my yard that my dogs were trying to chase after, and I stopped them. So we've got a lot of wildlife right in my backyard, and I love watching them. I love knowing about their behaviors and their lives, and so I try to do a daily dose every morning and then every evening when I come home of seeing who's where and what they're doing and how they're living, and that's my way of getting back into nature in a very small way every day.
It's a great tip because not everyone has the comfort or has the ability to be in nature a lot. Like I'm working the whole day as well, and I would rather spend my days going scuba diving or walking in a forest, but I simply can't. You have to work. But spending that little time, for example, on the start of your day or the end of the day, just 10 minutes already, it's better than nothing.
Yeah,
I think that's a great tip for people who don't have too much time, that you can still make it work. You can go, even if you don't have a backyard, you can go to a local park and just watch some birds or
squirrels.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
Exactly.
There's a lot you can.
It's a great way to start your day, and even at lunchtime, if you have the ability to go walk to an area that has some trees and grass, you can quickly immerse yourself in that little habitat and watch butterflies or birds or squirrels or whatever is there, and really just pay attention to what's happening right in your area, and feel that same inner peace that one feels when they go off to a wilderness area for a few days or a week. So you can capture small moments like that, and those small moments just, for me, refresh me and make me feel whole.
Yeah, I think that's what we all need sometimes.
Absolutely.
Cool. So is there anything to bring this to an end? Is there anything you're currently working on that you would like, to tell people about? Or if people want to know more and learn more about the work you're doing, what can they do? How can they find you and your organization?
Yeah, so I haven't talked much about my organization, but my organization really is a wonderful fit for me because we support research and science that is applied, and we try to make it actionable. And so, certainly we want the science we support to be published in scientific journals because that is the gold seal of approval. But we also want it to be used by our coastal communities and our resource managers and politicians and the public. And so every year we support about $1 million in research projects. In addition, we also have an extension team of folks who are located across the coast from Beaumont down to Brownsville. And it's their job to live in and work with the coastal communities to understand their needs and to help me understand what their problems are that need to be addressed with science. And so they share information up here with us about what the coastal community needs are. We support the research that needs to solve those problems, and we communicate that back down to the coastal community. So we've got this wonderful two-way flow of information that is happening, and the whole goal here is that the science is going to be put to use and not just end up in a journal that nobody other than other scientists are going to read. And so I think that's really powerful, a powerful model that Sea Grant programs across the United States employ. And it's that integration of research, extension, as well as education. And it's our job to take science and communicate it to the public so that it can make a difference for our natural resources and for the people who depend on them. And so it's a wonderful place to work. It's a wonderful organization that produces some incredible impacts and accomplishments every year. And we're here to serve the needs of Texas and Texans. And we're nimble enough that we can, respond to hurricanes very quickly, quicker than any of the federal agencies can. We can respond to harmful algal blooms like red tides. We can respond to any of the coastal community needs. If there's, a crash in the fisheries, we're out there to help. We're out there to train fishermen, to teach them how to reduce catching sea turtles accidentally. We're out there to help fishermen learn how to market their catch to stores that want to only purchase sustainable fish and shellfish. We're out there to help coastal communities learn where they should build and where they shouldn't build to prevent flooding from occurring in their communities. So we're doing a lot of different things that are impactful and meaningful and relevant. And it's just really a great way to end my career working in an organization that helps so many people every year.
So for our listeners, they can keep up with news updates on your website, on the Texas Sea Grant website, or
Absolutely.
Twitter, or what are the social channels?
So Texas Sea Grant has Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and we've got different audiences on each one of those different social media channels, and we've got an amazing communications team who are constantly developing new and engaging content. And I encourage you to really check it out in July, because we do a lot for Plastic Free July, which has become kind of a nationwide and probably worldwide phenomenon where people are challenged to give up some plastic that they use regularly for that month, with the intent of getting them to give up that plastic forever. So every July I give up some plastic. I haven't decided which one it's going to be, but I've got a few more days to think about it. And so if you check out our social media channels, you'll see it. We're also on YouTube as well. I forgot to mention YouTube, and our team just produces some fabulous things. So I hope folks will check us out and keep following us even after July. We do so many wonderful programs, formal education, informal education with kids, with adults, in our coastal communities and elsewhere in our state. It's really just an incredible program.
Yeah, I think you're doing some great things, and it was a pleasure to listen to you, basically, and see how much knowledge there is and experience, and that's really awesome to just listen to and try to learn from.
Yes, and provide a perspective for, like we mentioned before, people that don't get to experience these things like you did and other people in your field of work did. So thank you so much for sitting with us and having this chat, and we hope that the message spread out there and that our listeners learn a few things about the environment, conservation, and maybe spark a little interest in going out and spending more time in nature.
And
Thank you so much.
And Plastic Free July.
And Plastic Free July. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to share bits and pieces of my life with you, and it's been an incredible journey, and most of it was unplanned. A lot of it just happened because there were opportunities, and I took those opportunities. And so that's something that I try to encourage students to do is to explore all their opportunities and not be afraid to seek out things that look a little different, look maybe a little out of the box, and to explore things when they're young and even when they're older. And so I think that has always been really important to me, is to evolve and to adapt and to try those new things. So that's my message. Try, if you have never been outdoors, go out, give it a try.
Go out.
Yeah, give it a try.
That's the message.
It's the best drug I know of.
Yeah, no, it is true. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.